The first 25 days after D-Day were nothing short of a slow-motion disaster for the German army. At sunrise on June 6, 1944, many officers still believed they could push the Allies back into the sea, just as they had once dreamed during the early years of the war. But the truth revealed itself quickly, brutally, and without mercy. On the beaches of Normandy, thousands of German soldiers fought with discipline and courage, yet they were overwhelmed by something they had never faced before: an enemy with limitless supplies. While German units rationed every bullet, the Allies unloaded mountains of ammunition, fuel, food, and tanks every single hour. And every hour, the balance shifted further against Germany. Behind the front, confusion ruled. Reports from commanders were contradictory. Some units claimed they had stopped the Americans. Others confessed they were collapsing. Radio lines were jammed. Maps were outdated. And above all of them, Allied aircraft ruled the skies with total dominance. Every daylight movement became a gamble with death. A single German truck could be destroyed within minutes by a passing fighter bomber. Soldiers began moving only at night, crawling like ghosts across shattered roads. Meanwhile, the German high command in Berlin convinced itself that the invasion was only a diversion. They expected a second landing near Calais, a landing that never came. Because of this delusion, entire armies were kept in the wrong place, unable to reinforce Normandy when it mattered. Inside France, the situation grew worse. Panzer divisions rushed toward the front, but many arrived in pieces. Tanks broke down. Fuel convoys were bombed. Some units lost a third of their strength before even reaching the battlefield. Commanders reported that they no longer controlled coordinated armies, only scattered groups fighting for survival. By mid-June, a painful reality became clear. The German defensive line was collapsing. The Allies kept expanding their beachheads, pushing inward, capturing vital roads and towns. Every German counterattack failed. Every promise from Berlin sounded more detached from reality. Soldiers on the ground felt it first. Veterans who had survived years of fighting on the Eastern Front whispered quietly among themselves, "This is the end. We cannot stop them." Morale began to crumble, not because the German soldiers lacked bravery, but because they finally realized the war had turned into something unwinnable. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and most importantly, outmaneuvered by a force that controlled the air, the sea, and soon the land. On June 30, 1944, just 25 days after the invasion, Field Marshal von Rundstedt sent a desperate message to Berlin. His words were simple, furious, and brutally honest. "Make peace, you fools." For him, the collapse had already begun. And he knew that if the German leadership continued to ignore reality, the disaster would only grow larger. History would soon prove him right. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt was not a man easily shocked. He had served in World War I, survived the chaos of the Weimar years, and watched the German army rise again under Hitler. He had seen enough battles, defeats, and victories to understand war better than most men alive. But what he witnessed in France after D-Day filled him with something he had not felt in years: fury. Not at the enemy, he respected the Allies. His anger was directed at his own leaders in Berlin. By late June 1944, von Rundstedt had received enough frontline reports to know the truth. German divisions were being destroyed one after another. The vaunted panzer forces, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, were now broken units scattered across hedgerows, fuel-starved and hunted from the sky. Allied aircraft ripped apart supply convoys before they even reached the front. Entire regiments were disappearing in hours. He demanded reinforcements. He demanded freedom of command. He demanded realism. Berlin responded with fantasies. Hitler insisted that fanatical resistance could stop the Allies. Goebbels promised new miracle weapons. Other officials repeated the same nonsense about holding every inch of ground. They talked about counterattacks that no longer existed, reserves that were already destroyed, and divisions that had fewer than 500 men left. Von Rundstedt read these messages in disbelief. He knew they were lies, deadly lies. Every day the situation worsened. German officers begged for permission to retreat to stronger defensive positions. Von Rundstedt agreed, but Hitler forbade it. The order was always the same: stand fast. That phrase haunted him. Stand fast while being bombed into dust. Stand fast while tanks ran out of fuel. Stand fast while the Allies grew stronger every hour. By late June, he had reached his breaking point. On the evening of June 29th, after another report describing collapsing units and hopeless conditions, a phone call came from the OKW leadership. They asked him what Germany should do next. Von Rundstedt did not hesitate. His voice was sharp, loud, and filled with exhausted rage. "Make peace, you fools." These were not the words of a coward, nor of a man defeated. They were the words of someone who understood the battlefield far better than the men giving orders from bunkers hundreds of kilometers away. He tried to explain. Germany had no air superiority, no fuel reserves, no strategic initiative, and soon no army left in France. The war could not be won. But Berlin dismissed his warning as defeatism. Within days, von Rundstedt was dismissed from his command. His honesty had cost him his position, but history would prove him right. The German front would collapse completely in the months that followed, the Allies breaking out of Normandy and racing toward Paris. Von Rundstedt did not live to see the full consequences, but he understood before almost anyone else that Germany was fighting a war already lost. His anger was not just frustration. It was the final warning of a general who saw the truth when others refused to. Inside the headquarters of the German High Command in late June 1944, the atmosphere felt more like a trapped bunker than the nerve center of a world power. Officers walked quickly, avoiding eye contact. Messengers whispered instead of speaking. Everyone worked, but no one dared to tell the truth. It was the result of a single emotion that shaped every decision: fear of Hitler. The reports from Normandy were terrifying. Entire battalions were being erased in days. Panzer divisions that once rolled triumphantly across Europe were now shredded by Allied air power before they could even reach the front. Commanders at the battlefield begged for permission to retreat, maneuver, or at least reorganize. But inside the High Command, the truth was treated like a crime. Hitler refused to believe the Allies could win, so his officers pretended they weren't winning. Meetings became performances. Generals presented positive developments that barely existed. Losses were described as temporary setbacks. Requests for strategic withdrawals were softened or buried entirely. No one wanted to deliver news that might anger the Führer. The consequences were well known. Careers destroyed, reputations ruined, and sometimes imprisonment. Behind closed doors, many generals privately admitted that the war was slipping away. But once they stepped into Hitler's presence, into that dim room where he paced, raged, and lectured, they froze. His temper was legendary. His memory for perceived betrayal was long. A disagreement could turn into an accusation of treason within seconds. So denial became policy. Delusion became strategy. Instead of adapting, the High Command clung to fantasies. They believed the Allies could still be thrown into the sea. They pretended the Luftwaffe could regain control of the skies. They claimed fresh divisions were on their way, even though those divisions existed only on paper. During conferences, Hitler's voice dominated everything. He talked about holding at all costs, about counterattacks that had no tanks and reserves that had no soldiers. Some officers nodded with forced enthusiasm. Others stared silently, knowing the truth but unable to speak it. The fear was not just personal, it was systemic. Hitler had created a culture where obedience mattered more than logic. Questioning an order was seen as sabotage. Suggesting retreat was seen as weakness. And admitting defeat was unthinkable. This is why von Rundstedt's outburst, "Make peace, you fools," shocked the entire upper command. Not because they disagreed with him, but because he dared to say openly what they themselves whispered only in private. Meanwhile, the situation on the ground worsened. German forces in Normandy were exhausted, outnumbered, and constantly bombed. Yet reports sent to Berlin minimized losses. Hitler was told reinforcements were coming, even though they were destroyed before arriving. He was told soldiers were holding strong, even as units dissolved under overwhelming pressure. Inside the high command, reality and official policy drifted further apart every day. By late June, Germany was fighting two wars, one against the Allies and one against the truth. The high command could not face the first because they refused to face the second. Their denial blinded strategy, their fear silenced honesty, and their delusion ensured that Germany's defeat would come faster, and far more brutally, than it needed to. By late June 1944, just weeks after D-Day, the truth was already carved into the battlefields of France. Germany had lost the war, even if almost no one in its leadership dared to say it aloud. The signs were everywhere, on the roads clogged with retreating soldiers, in the skies ruled completely by Allied aircraft, and in the desperate, exhausted faces of officers who knew they were sending men into battles they could no longer win. The collapse did not begin suddenly. It had been building for years. Germany's early victories had been powered by surprise, speed, and a fully prepared army. But by 1944, the strategic balance had reversed completely. The Allies had overwhelming industry, manpower, and control of the seas and skies. Germany was bleeding faster than it could replace anything: tanks, fuel, aircraft, or trained soldiers. Inside the German high command, even the most loyal officers could see the truth. Reports from Normandy painted a grim picture. Panzer divisions were being destroyed before they reached the front. Infantry units were fighting without artillery support, without supplies, sometimes without even radio communication. Entire regiments disappeared in hours under Allied bombardment. Meanwhile, the Allies only grew stronger. Every day more ships landed on the beaches, more tanks rolled ashore, more aircraft patrolled the skies. It was a tidal wave, one Germany had no ability to stop. For generals like von Rundstedt, the conclusion was obvious. Continuing the war was suicide, not just for the army, but for the nation itself. He saw that every day the fighting continued, thousands more German soldiers died for objectives that no longer mattered. Cities at home were burned to ashes by strategic bombing. Civilians faced hunger, terror, and hopelessness. Peace was no longer a negotiation tactic. It was the only lifeline left. Yet Hitler refused to consider it. He clung to the belief that a miracle weapon, a sudden Allied mistake, or sheer German willpower could turn the tide. His generals knew better. They had watched miracles disappear on the Eastern Front, in Italy, and now in France. They understood that Germany could not fight the entire world and survive. As the Allies pushed inland, capturing town after town, Hitler demanded counterattacks that were impossible to launch. He ordered units that no longer existed to defend positions already lost. Each command meeting became a ritual of denial. Anyone who dared suggest ending the war risked being labeled defeatist or traitor. Still, behind closed doors, the truth whispered through the ranks. Officers shared private conversations. "We cannot win. We must stop this. Germany won't survive another year." Some even spoke about negotiating with the Western Allies to avoid Soviet occupation, an idea that circulated but never took shape, crushed by the regime's paranoia. By late June, von Rundstedt's famous outburst, "Make peace, you fools," was not a moment of madness. It was a moment of clarity. He knew the war was lost not because of one defeat, but because everything that made victory possible had already vanished. Germany lacked fuel. Germany lacked aircraft. Germany lacked trained men. Germany lacked allies. And most importantly, Germany lacked time. Every day the war continued meant only one thing: the final destruction of the nation he had sworn to protect. But Hitler's refusal sealed the fate of millions. Instead of ending the conflict, he dragged Germany into a final year of chaos, ruin, and unimaginable suffering. The war could have ended in 1944. Instead, it continued because one man refused to accept reality. And so the tragedy deepened. Germany's generals knew peace was the only option. Germany's soldiers knew the war was unwinnable. But Germany's leader believed surrender was worse than destruction. In the end, the war wasn't lost at Normandy. It was lost long before, the moment truth became forbidden and peace became unthinkable. In the summer of 1944, Germany was standing on the edge of a cliff. Its generals saw the drop clearly. Its soldiers felt it every day in the mud and rubble of the front lines. And its civilians experienced it through the shaking ground as Allied bombs fell night after night. Yet inside Hitler's headquarters, the truth was suffocated under blind loyalty and fear. After D-Day, the message coming from the front was unmistakable. Germany could not win the war. Von Rundstedt, the senior commander in the West, delivered the warning with blunt honesty. Reports showed panzer divisions annihilated before they could counterattack, fuel depots destroyed by air raids, and infantry units fighting with half their strength. Every mile the Allies advanced was a reminder that Germany could no longer stop them. But when von Rundstedt demanded realistic action, the answer from Berlin was always the same: more counterattacks, more sacrifices, more faith in willpower. It was as if Hitler believed that refusing defeat could somehow erase the reality on the battlefield. Inside the high command, the atmosphere grew poisonous. Officers whispered about the hopeless situation, yet none dared say it openly. Those who questioned Hitler's orders risked being dismissed, arrested, or worse. The shadow of the Gestapo hung over every conversation. Even experienced generals became careful, speaking in vague phrases like, "The situation is difficult," instead of, "The war is lost." Von Rundstedt's outburst, "Make peace, you fools," summed up the despair of the professional military. In the summer of 1944, Germany was standing on the edge of a cliff. Its generals saw the drop clearly. Its soldiers felt it every day in the mud and rubble of the front lines. And its civilians experienced it through the shaking ground as Allied bombs fell night after night. Yet inside Hitler's headquarters, the truth was suffocated under blind loyalty and fear. After D-Day, the message coming from the front was unmistakable. Germany could not win the war. Von Rundstedt, the senior commander in the West, delivered the warning with blunt honesty. Reports showed panzer divisions annihilated before they could counterattack, fuel depots destroyed by air raids, and infantry units fighting with half their strength. Every mile the Allies advanced was a reminder that Germany could no longer stop them. But when von Rundstedt demanded realistic action, the answer from Berlin was always the same: more counterattacks, more sacrifices, more faith in willpower. It was as if Hitler believed that refusing defeat could somehow erase the reality on the battlefield. Inside the high command, the atmosphere grew poisonous. Officers whispered about the hopeless situation, yet none dared say it openly. Those who questioned Hitler's orders risked being dismissed, arrested, or worse. The shadow of the Gestapo hung over every conversation. Even experienced generals became careful, speaking in vague phrases like, "The situation is difficult," instead of, "The war is lost." Von Rundstedt's outburst, "Make peace, you fools," summed up the despair of the professional military leadership. They weren't calling for surrender out of cowardice, but out of logic. The longer the war continued, the more Germany would bleed. But Hitler and his loyal inner circle viewed peace as betrayal. In their minds, even suggesting negotiation was treason. So the warnings were ignored. Instead of seeking peace, Hitler